Pete. Welcome. Good morning. It's 9:01. It's Monday, April 18th, 2022. Welcome to our strategic planning meeting. Let the record reflect that all three commissioners are present and our executive management team. And we are starting off this morning with Kathleen Torella. Kathleen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Community Services, Housing Community Development would like to make a request to the Board of County Commissioners. And this request is to allow us to use allocated mental health sales tax that's already allocated to our department for a new behavioral health transitional support program. This would be a 2-year pilot program, and it would provide for limited behavioral health services in a transitional shelter setting and to Spokane County residents only. The background regarding the development of this proposed program is that we learned in late November 2021 from one of our community's transitional shelter owners and operators that they were facing a funding shortfall. As we did the analysis on the causes of this shortfall and did jointly with the city of Spokane, we found that one of the elements that they had a gap for is for services for eligible non-Medicaid individuals. And that is because we as the ASO division, we can provide for behavioral health services, but only within available resources. And our history as an RSN, BHO, and now as an ASO is that we have not contracted with shelter owners and operators for behavioral health services. In this case of this program, we're looking at transitional shelters that are using behavioral health as services to help support these individuals while they're in the shelter, but they are doing it as a licensed behavioral health agency, not as just a shelter owner and operator. So we have some very specific components of the pilot that we would propose within this program. So this was the area that we wanted to address. We also found in our review and research and meeting, at least with this one shelter operator, is that a lot of times these individuals don't want services. They don't have a relationship. They don't want to make appointments. They don't want to, they're fairly isolated in this situation. And that was part of the reason this shelter owner and operator obtained a behavioral health license and then is bringing these services into the shelter, is to get individuals to receive services at their point of site where they are at and at the shelter. Part of the problem with it is they don't, with their contracts with the managed care organizations, it's a fee-for-service based funding, which is typical, but because they don't get enough services, it's hard to sustain that type of a model. And we realized we were one of the gaps in that relationship, not having any kind of a contract to assist with that. So we thought this pilot would be a good opportunity for us to be able to determine whether our services whether our funding would be used well for these services, as well as to fund a full-time, what we're calling a behavioral health interventionist, who can help work with these individuals to build the relationships and the trust and help them understand the importance of, if they need the behavioral health services and are eligible for them, to seek them out, especially get them signed up for Medicaid if they're eligible, and be able to open them up to a larger continuum of behavioral health services. So it's partially for services and then partially for the employment of a full-time individual to help individuals not only get signed up for Medicaid if they're eligible, but also be aware of other services, behavioral health services that are out there and available to them if they're eligible. So that's just the business concept of it. And what we would be looking at is a investment of $570,000 per year. And that would be both for the services that would be our portion of eligible non-Medicaid individuals, as well as for the full-time interventionist. And we are looking at up to 3 agencies or contracts that we would include in the RFP if of those that would be apply and be eligible. The reason that we bring it forward to the Board of County Commissioners at this point where we're just at the concept stage, we haven't done an RFP or done an RFP like this before, is because this particular pilot would be funded entirely from mental health sales tax or behavioral health sales tax, which we don't typically do. We usually try to braid the funding in, but in this case, it would be from mental health sales tax, again, from funding that we already have and receive on an annual basis. So we're not asking for new money or additional funding in our allocation for it. And because of that, we bring it forward to the Board of County Commissioners at this stage that if you approve with a motion, then we would go forward with the procurement process and RFP selection process and do contracts at that point. So before I turn it over to you for any questions that you might have in that regard, I'd like to turn the time over to Justin Johnson, our clinical expert and assistant director of our department, who has put together the documents, which are attachment A and B, that are related to an executive summary and a presentation that briefly outlines the program. I'll have him review that and then turn it over to the commissioners for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen, Chairman and commissioners. So just briefly on the program itself, it was really a tricky situation into what services would be duplicative of what Medicaid is providing in the community, and really honing in the area where the gap exists so that the funds that we would utilize are strictly being targeted for those that need either the transitional support or isn't covered by an existing insurance. And so we have 4 key areas that we were looking at engaging for this behavioral health transitional support interventionist. So the funds would use for the position itself. And then for the services covered by Medicaid, it would be sans that amount paid out by that insurance company. So it would less that amount so that there would be the proportionate amount respective to the services being covered by the responsible parties. So the education and harm reduction would be the primary focal point for the transitional shelters. We're really looking at initial engagement, resource review, and then building and maintaining relationships and enhancing recovery and well-being. Those are those key ones that are not covered by Medicaid because you have to have a relationship or a service covered code. So really they would be providing the welcome and engagement, recognizing that not all individuals in a transitional shelter necessarily meet or have substantial or significant behavioral health conditions. They may need support, but may not need intensive inpatient. The second aspect is outreach and engagement, is to provide that extra level of support and understanding, both for employment, housing, advanced directive, socialization, health and wellness, as well as behavioral health coordination. And then the third component is just brief intervention, which is a covered service. So a lot of these could be billed out to Medicaid. Some of those would have to require an intake and assessment. Really the goal there is you've now met the next tier level. Let's get you into a provider and covered. And then the last one is actually outpatient, what they're currently doing now, but expanding it, because I believe right now they're only providing 4 subset of services under the existing code. And that's what they're billing for. And we're looking to expand that so it's more comprehensive, much to what was shared by the previous transitional shelter in previous meetings as to a holistic care. So that's the goal of the intervention, is really looking at engaging them in providing services that are not covered, and then the full range to the point that they are. The individual would be credentialed and licensed under Department of Health. The agency would be credentialed and licensed under Department of Health. And then our stipulations at or below 220% federal poverty level, as well as the need to ensure Medicaid eligibility and referral to healthcare navigators to enroll them also apply. So all of this would be going on at the same time. And there are healthcare navigators out there. So there's partnerships with CHAS and other facilities. So the goal there is no drop, it's holistic care, but at the same time that the funding is utilized very specifically to address the actual gaps. So there's no duplication of services, and individuals who need it are transitioned. We're not replacing a system, we're helping to connect them. So that's the overall goal and intent of the position. Because again, as we've said, the last thing we want to do is continue to have a gap where we don't have the combined forces of the Medicaid MCOs really having a strategic implementation plan other than what we're putting forward to you. So that's kind of a rough breakdown. Don't want to go too much into it. And if there's any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
Where you say the services will be provided to Spokane County residents, did you just use that as you asked them what their last permanent address was? Is that how that's determined?
Yes, and there's a second component to that, which is really a more difficult one for those that are homeless. So we follow the federal guidelines for what homelessness is, which are the individuals in a transitory state. They are here for longer than 30 days is usually the minimum standard. So if they're saying we're homeless, but we showed that they just bust in from Seattle, we try to look at, is this where you're going to stay or are we going to transition back? Oftentimes individuals who are here on vacation, we would bill out to the appropriate ASO or MCO from that region so that the funding then comes directly from them. But ultimately, yeah, they would have to show residence and or some sort of connection to Spokane County and or homelessness longer than 30 days that has, again, it's hard to prove that and it's hard to force someone to have to go through that. So it's really by the individual's verbal commitment to that.
Okay, and when you say Spokane County, that's all of Spokane County, not just unincorporated county?
It would be all of Spokane County.
Okay. That's all I got.
Okay, so I think I'm excited because I think I, was in that meeting with you when we were finding out what that gap was. And I think that's what the state is, when they kind of switched everything up, trying to fill those gaps. And so I think it's going to be great for us to, in helping determine as a pilot project what the gap is and how we can fill it and how we can help then the state recognize that to then help with us in the future. So I'm excited that, we're, again, Spokane County is really, I think, on the cutting edge of trying to holistically help and understand what the whole system needs. So thank you very much for looking into this and figuring it out. And, it meets the criteria for the mental health, sales tax money. We have that. So this helps us with our homelessness, where we can actually help transition people and get them seeing where they're at so that they can transition out. That's going to be, better for the entire county and community. So I'm excited about the project.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooney. Part of it too is the reason we selected as a pilot, which is what we typically, as we start to move forward as an ASO, as we find system gaps, is to do them as pilots so that we can get them up, see what's going on, and then reach out and work more so with the MCO partners and the behavioral health agencies, much as Justin described. But the hope is that this may only be, as far as the full-time position, is only temporary while all the connections get made through the flow. And then if we still need to fund it for the eligible non-Medicaid individuals that potentially, as you said, as the state becomes more and more aware of this, it is our intent is that then they would provide the funding for it, that rather than having to use our local. But we do use our mental health sales tax to fund individuals from a standpoint of individuals in the Spokane County area, but specific to must-pays that are required by our contract as the ASO with things like inpatient community stays, Involuntary Treatment Act, court costs, and things like that, the court evaluators, those types of things that are big hit numbers that are must-pays that we are required to do so. If our funding from the state is inadequate, we then utilize that funding. So in the last year or two, we've received a lot of COVID funding at the federal level, but we know that funding is not going to last. And so we may have to look back to our mental health sales tax for us. So that's why it fits perfectly with regards to this point in time to have a 2-year pilot to be able to know that we have the funding and be able to utilize it. And then we can look out forward in the future when we get out there another year or two out there where our funding is, to whether we can continue to do this, because we'd like to be able to take opportunities for these fundings to fill in gaps where the system is overlooked. So this is a great opportunity for, I think, for the Board of County Commissioners to do so and approve this concept for us to go forward.
One question on the RFP, just making sure that we're putting in, I'm sure you are, but just making sure, since we haven't seen it, the measurements and all of that and data that, you know, the providers are going to need to provide that to us. And I'm sure that's part of the reimbursement for the funding or paying them for that. So just making sure that that's there.
And in fact, we haven't done the RFP, and we haven't done an RFP for this type of a setting before, but definitely we've done performance, RFPs and contracts, and we are in the background, making that determination of how we're going to do it, whether it's totally performance or it's going to have performance that also contains that they have to report services as well as outcomes. So we're in that process of developing that. So I appreciate that it would most certainly be a part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. So Kathleen, so we are going to spend about $1,140 on this program over a 2-year period. But you have an expectation that if it's successful, the state will pick it up and fund it. Help me understand why the state would pick that expense up as opposed to saying, you're already covering it with your 1%. Why don't you just keep on doing it? And oh, by the way, we're going to make it a mandate.
Always that's a possibility. But I think from a standpoint, by saying it is that what our plan would be is as we're working with the MCO partners and as well as with the healthcare authority, is that these individuals would be more oriented to being able to it being more of a usual rather than an unusual process to be able to connect with the Medicaid navigators, to be on Medicaid, maybe on more timely. And so hopefully the interventionist role may not be needed, or we might be able to work with the MCOs to help share the funding for it in the future. So because they do receive a small portion of eligible non-Medicaid funding that they could use for this if it doesn't fall under their Medicaid funding. So we have to kind of be a part of it in order to have those kinds of meetings with the MCOs to see what they are willing and not willing to do to be able to help fund this need. And we have actually done pilots where we have started it on our own, and we're very, very much surprised by the support of the state coming forward. Initially, the Teen Line pilot project that Justin just moved through. Initially, we were thinking we were going to use have to propose using mental health sales tax for that. But as he explained it to the state, sold the concept to the state, they actually came forward and said, you could use this for this. You could use this funding, state funding or federal funding for it. And so getting their approval for it, it took a little bit longer, but we were able to get their approval to help do that kind of funding. So a lot of times we come up with these concepts, and then if we can have, as Commissioner Cooney said, have the outcomes to show the success of it and the importance of it, that oftentimes the state will dialogue with us and allow us to provide state funding for that purpose.
And we did have a presentation at the Shrills meeting from the provider showing that there's this gap. So that kind of was the first chance to get to the healthcare authority to have them start to see what the needs are.
Exactly, and we encourage that operator to work with the MCOs on seeking better rates for the funding. So again, we're looking at different avenues. This one is very specifically behavioral health. The operator also has a shortfall that they need to look to, the city of Spokane, which they have. And as of last week, the city of Spokane CHHS director said that they are working on getting additional funding from the sheltering operations sites. So there was kind of two pieces. It was brought to us as a shelter operations need, but as we dissected it a little bit further, we realized there was a component that was behavioral health, but there was also a component that needed to come from the side of the house that does Homeless Housing Assistance Act allocations, where we have a portion that we had allocated forward through our RFP process for the individuals that are outside the city of Spokane, but within Spokane County. But CHHS had not come forward yet with all of their funding that was available. But they reported last week that they are now in the process of addressing the majority, if not all of that funding shortfall for 2022. We'll be back in this situation in 2023, most likely is what they said. But we are trying to work with them as well as other stakeholders in the community to get a feel for what is the entire inventory of shelters and sheltering needs? What's that budget? And how can we better plan forward strategically for those costs? So that's kind of a separate entire item, but this specific piece we felt was something that belonged in the behavioral health arena that we could actually get behind and support.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So you were saying early on that you would need a motion from us to move
If you could
forward?
just make a motion that you support it, again, because it's solely funded from mental health sales tax for a 2-year period of time, then we would go forward in developing the RFP if you approve.
Okay, I'm gonna just double check with Mark McLean, whether you need a head nod or a full motion, just because it's already within your budget. You've already been allocated the funds. So I just want to double check.
Okay,
I think in general, I would like a motion for most of these things. I think they're helpful, even if it's just a clerk motion.
Okay.
Just to track it. Thank you.
So Kathleen, do you want to state what you would like the motion, or what the motion?
certainly I'd request a motion to approve the CSHCD department and SERBH ASO division to procure and contract to provide limited behavioral health services as part of a 2-year BHTSP pilot program where services are provided within a transitional shelter setting to Spokane County residents only.
You mean make an application to that, right? Set out an RFP?
Yes.
So move.
I will second the motion.
So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you,
Thank you,
Justin and
Commissioners.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda, we have Doug Chase and Paul Knowles for a parks update. And I see both of them.
Oh, right. Really like it when things work. Well, good morning, commissioners. We appreciate your time this morning. We have several projects here that Mr. Knowles has been very busy preparing for you. He's got a great presentation. And with that, I will turn it over very quickly. Mr. Knowles.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Good morning, commissioners. Ron, would you bring up the presentation? All right, let's just jump to slide 2 here. Next slide. So I've got a couple items that we're going to try to hit in a very quick succession here. So one is just an update on Make Beacon Hill Public that the board authorized back in 2020. And an action item associated with following through with that project, which is an Vista donated conservation easement. The second item involves sort of a phase 2 of that project. So a grant application authorization, as well as an interlocal agreement with the City of Spokane Parks and Recreation Department for John H. Shields Park, which is a part of Beacon Hill. The third item that I want to go over is Rimrock to Riverside acquisition. This is a Conservation Futures proposed acquisition, and there are 2 action items associated with that, funding authorization resolution and grant application authorization. So let's go to the next slide here. So just to orient yourselves from mental health to parks here, we've got in the center of the screen the Make Beacon Hill Public Project area, as you can see, sort of sandwiched between the City of Spokane and City of Spokane Valley, kind of right in the heart of where a lot of people in the county live. I love the photo on the right, which is, I think, from the late 60s, early 70s, looking down Sunset Hill towards downtown Spokane and Beacon Hill in the backdrop. I love this image because nothing has changed related to Beacon Hill in 4 or 5 decades. So it's that backdrop still the same today, more or less. Next slide, please. So prior to our Make Beacon Hill Public project, so this is pre-2020, we had a 46-mile trail system, essentially, all volunteer built, of which 70% was on private property. Which is just amazing to me. On top of that, this area sort of served as an informal open space park area for a lot of residents in Northeast Spokane and Spokane Valley. So a lot of folks were using this area, even though a lot of the property and a lot of the trails were on privately owned property. Next slide, please. So fast forward to today, and we successfully applied for 2 grants from the state for $1.5 million with the help of the City of Spokane Parks and Recreation Department. We've been able to acquire 60 acres of privately held property that is now owned either by Spokane County or the City of Spokane. And now we're kind of in the last phase of this initial project, which is working to record conservation easements donated by Avista on Avista held property shaded in orange there on the map. Next slide, please. So the proposed action item would be to accept a donated conservation easement on 76 acres there outlined in white. This is a conservation easement that is perpetual and would preserve public recreation on the property, as well as sort of the natural values of it. So the forest land there on the property. The cool thing about this easement is it allows for assignment. So basically in the event, which we'll kind of get into later in the presentation, in the event that perhaps the City of Spokane were to take over this whole area, we could assign this conservation easement to the City of Spokane Parks and Recreation Department. We could also assign aspects of the easement to folks like Evergreen East Mountain Bike Alliance for the maintenance of the trails there on the property. So this action item we're hoping to bring to you next week on your consent agenda. Any questions on this item?
I think you're good.
Okay, next slide, please. So let's see here. I'm going to minimize. There we go. So moving on, we have this, because of the success of this Make Beacon Hill Public Phase 1 project, we have this narrow funding window to sort of follow this up with the same people at the state that loved our initial grant applications with a follow-up grant application. So we've been working with the City of Spokane Parks and Recreation Department to scope this project out, and what this area really needs now that we've sort of satisfied a lot of the public land acquisition question is capacity and safety improvements at the main trailheads and entryways to this trail system. So we're looking at improvements at both Camp Sakani Park, which is City of Spokane, and Shields Park, which is the county. Next slide, please. So right now with Shields Park, this is kind of a current view from the west end of the park looking east along Upriver Drive. See kind of an undefined gravelish parking lot. Next slide, please. What we're envisioning here is basically defining that parking lot. So paving and striping, adding some security features like lighting, a trailhead web camera here, some basic landscaping, and really that's it. Pretty simple improvements there. Next slide, please. So this is a view currently looking from the east end west, so kind of on the opposite side of the park. You can see this kind of obscured parking lot to the right with a kind of a dead end. Go to the next slide, please, Ron. What we're envisioning here is basically removing that dead end aspect, so adding a second approach on the east end that would allow for greater circulation in the parking lot, removing a couple of those trees to kind of open it up a little bit, and adding lighting, adding a webcam here as well. And one of the cool aspects of this project is this boulder climbing playground, where we're looking to kind of activate this park a little bit more for families and really try to bring that positive use into the park. Go to the next slide, please, Ron. So that's what this would look like. So that bouldering playground, which is still kind of a work in progress, but would kind of provide for a lot of different challenge levels for kids, basically from 3, 4 years old, all the way up to 12 and beyond. I personally love the giant marmot. And I think that would be a pretty exciting feature for the kids to get their photos with. Next slide, please. This project has a lot of support from a lot of the user groups in the area, and we've been able to date to receive pledges of $185,000 towards this project that would be used as part of our grant application with the city of Spokane. Next slide, please. So the proposed grant application for this phase 2, again, it would be a joint Spokane County, City of Spokane grant application requesting roughly $1.5 million in state funding. The county match proposed would be $300,000. This is proposed to come out of real estate excise tax 2 and would not be needed until 2023. This is consistent with the 6-year plan, and this project and amount was identified there for 2023. And if awarded, one of the cool things about this project is that City of Spokane Parks Department has agreed to basically manage all contracts, billing, and construction. So the lion's share of the work after the grant award would fall on the city, with us being sort of there on a coordination front for them to basically coordinate aspects of the Shields Park component with county parks. So the action item proposed would be to authorize this grant application to the Recreation and Conservation Office. And this, we're hoping, would be on next Tuesday's consent agenda. Any questions on this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please, Ron. Moving quickly along here. Kind of that same area, so Shields Park, outlined in yellow there. The county purchased the west parcel back in 1987, and improvements built in the early 90s by the county were located on city parks property. There doesn't appear to be any historic or existing agreement for this, or the county's management of the park as a whole. This is something that we checked, and city parks checked their records as well. So the other thing to keep in mind is this property now provides primary access to the Banta property to the north that was acquired as part of this Beacon Hill Public Phase 1 project. Next slide, please. So there you can see the property, the park property more clearly defined. So what we're proposing with this interlocal agreement is basically, one, formalize the relationship and roles here, because for the past 3 decades, the county has been maintaining improvements the county built on city property without apparently any sort of agreement. This would be for a 25-year term. The county would have the right to improve the property. So kind of envisioned in this phase 2 grant application would provide us that ability to improve it. One of the cool things about this interlocal agreement is basically, and we're still working on this with the city and massaging the language, but the city would agree to take ownership of county-owned Beacon Hill parcels if it annexes that portion of the upriver JPA lying north of Frederick Avenue. So right now, Shields Park and the city parks property both sit within that upriver JPA. So just kind of thinking ahead with good planning, trying to pave that route now, so we don't run into a big fat question mark years from now when an annexation proposal comes up. So the action item before the board would be to approve this interlocal agreement with the City of Spokane Parks and Recreation, and we're hoping to have this on your May 3rd consent agenda. Any questions on this item?
Yeah, looks, I think you're still good.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Next. Okay, and this is the last item. So this is the Rimrock to Riverside acquisition. It is a Conservation Futures proposed acquisition. It's currently the #1 ranked property on the 2021 prioritized acquisition list that was approved by the board at the end of 2021. The City of Spokane has agreed to accept ownership of this 116-acre proposed acquisition. The purchase price is set at just a little over 1.4 million and is within appraised value. And there are two action items associated with this project. One would be to authorize expenditure of conservation futures funds for the property's purchase. And we're hoping to have this on the board's consent agenda next Tuesday. The second action item would be to authorize a grant application to the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office to help fund 50% of the acquisition costs. And so that particular action item, if we were successful at getting that grant funding, it would be reimburse the county's fund, as we're hoping to have this property close in 2022, and the grant award wouldn't occur if we were successful until mid 2023. So any questions on this project or the proposed action items?
Yeah, I've got a question for you. Why is it important that the city accept ownership of this parcel of land?
I think when you're looking at this map, for example, just the efficiency of maintenance and operations here, if you can see, this would adjoin parkland already owned and maintained by the city of Spokane with Palisades Park. In addition, we really, the county's closest facility that we maintain here, oh geez, I'm trying to think, might either be Slavin Conservation Area off of 195 farther south, or probably actually Shields Park and Beacon Hill area. So, from an efficiency standpoint, it makes a lot of sense for the city of Spokane to accept ownership and maintain this property in perpetuity.
So the reason I ask is because as we look at the county meeting its obligations with regard to the countywide planning policies and parks and open space, here we're acquiring property that could be included in that inventory to satisfy the requirement for the countywide planning policies, and yet we're giving it to the city, which means that we don't get to take credit for it in our inventory. And so I just worry about, are we working against cross efforts with regard to, one, satisfying our obligations with the countywide planning policies, and at the same time trying to be efficient with the maintenance of property that we are acquiring through conservation futures and stuff. So I would ask that between now and next week, to reach out to Scott Chesney and have a conversation with him about how we need to marry the two programs together so we aren't working at cross purposes.
Okay, that sounds good, Commissioner French. It's coming back to me a little bit that I fielded a call last week from Bill Grimes, who's working, I think, with Scott on updating the capital facilities plan.
Yep.
And if I recall correctly, the LOS standard for parks is within the UGA. And I know this property sits outside of the UGA. So I don't know if this would contribute to that, but it is a good point that, when we look at every few years of updating our evaluation criteria that we use that the land evaluation committee uses to score and rank these nominations that come in, that we're making sure that we're checking off all the boxes and basically getting the most bang for the buck with these acquisitions.
So it might fall outside of the urban growth boundary today, but one of the things we're looking at doing is expanding the urban growth boundary. Yep. And this very well could fall inside the boundary, yep, which would then make it a county responsibility. So it's just worthy of a conversation, so to make sure that we're all heading in the same direction.
Yep. We will definitely connect with the planning director, and I think there are different types of parkland related to the different levels of service, and so we'll make sure we look closely at that as well, because certain parklands are not as heavily helpful, if you will, in those level of service, developed versus undeveloped, and we'll connect with the planning director and refresh our understanding of all of those different definitions and the types that we have, and make sure that we're continuing to coordinate well.
So with regard to those that don't fall under the definition, that's another topic you might want to let Scott know about, because we can change the definition so that we do get credit for it.
Understood.
It's a shame to own property for recreational purposes, which is what we're doing through Conservation Futures, and not get credit for it. So we can always change the definition so that we can include it.
Understand? Great point.
Any other questions or comments? And do you want him to present back before Tuesday?
Well, if they can have the conversation, maybe we can just touch bases on it on Monday just to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. If you guys can have that conversation and just kind of, brief us quickly on next Monday before the Tuesday 2 o'clock, that would be great.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all you have for us today? That was a lot.
I
That's
think
it.
that's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you guys for all your hard work. I appreciate it. That's a lot going on. So,
Indeed.
Okay.
thank
know.
you. Okay, next up, we have Arian Schmidt with the ARP planning update. Arian, welcome to the table.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to be at the table. Good morning, commissioners. I'm briefing on behalf of both myself and Jeff McMorris, who is out of the office today. First and foremost, in your packet, you will find the final document that will be on consent agenda tomorrow, recommending the preferred firm that came in from the RFP process for an ARP application portal. This is a fully encapsulated end-to-end repository for which we'd like to use through the duration of our ARP allocations. It is a subscription-based solution for which we will be partnering with the firm CLA Clifton Larson Allen. Their role will not only be standing up the subscription service for Spokane County, but also managing all the forthcoming and then back logic updates that occur from the US Treasury. We will be using this portal per our ARP process flow. The internal team went over that. I believe Jeff or myself will be reviewing that with you this year to understand the touches, but it really will help keep all of the ARP things separate. So there were two firms, and this particular firm, CLA, was definitely the highest scoring of the two. So we would like your consideration for approval for tomorrow's consent agenda. And that is that portion, unless you have any other questions.
It's 3H. I was looking for it too. I couldn't find the reference to CLA in the language.
Yeah, it just isn't a matter of selecting, approving the provider.
So Gina, do we want to update that on the posted agenda, or is the document itself okay to have the firm in it?
I think it's probably fine. I don't think the name of who it is has to be on the agenda. Supporting documents, we'll have that.
Yeah, and that was filed with Gina last week.
Sounds good.
Our intent, we plan to have that up and running and live the week of May 9th. So we will be preparing a list to circulate with you this week, meaning I will be preparing a list to circulate with you the next RFPs that we would like to have queued up to go out the door. And those would be utilizing this application portal. And that would be that week that we would work on releasing those. Second item is this is your first briefing for two other RFPs related to ARP that close this Wednesday. These are the only two that were done outside of this application portal. The first has to do with the water component of eligible categories and then educational attainment. So those will close this Wednesday. We do not know who will have responded until the close time at 3 p.m. And then the selection committee will then review those and have a recommendation. By Monday, we will prep that resolution similar to how we did this one, so that you're aware a resolution or list of preferred firms would be before you next Monday. Depending on how many we get in, it could be a long list, it could be a short list. And if you'd like time to interview any firms or dive deeper, that resolution can bump a week. So that's kind of how we're phrasing that.
I think just based on how we did this one, I'm comfortable doing it the same way.
And we will proceed with the same standing members in the RFP selection committee of myself, Jeff McMorris, and a grants office. And then going forward, a member of the senior executive team in that subject matter expert category would be the rotating fourth individual. Okay. Scott and I spoke, was that Friday?
Yep.
Friday about that. And then two other items. We had a conversation last week with other ARP forthcoming request in an eligible category, but it has not been determined as a directed funding by the Board of County Commissioners in the mental health capital world. And so that's something that not unlike what was considered for the northeast portion of town, where we would do some capital investments from another source. This is a mental health, behavioral health capital project in the west central area of town for youth and our Native population as an extension to the Native project. So very similar. So gathering more information on that, but that's another one that as we go through ARP requests, Jeff and I really like to look at, like Kathleen alluded to, other sources available in our community that might be a better fit. With that, we are in the process of updating the ARP website so that we are not only listing funds awarded from ARP, we're listing ideas submitted originally for ARP and how they were funded elsewhere, so that hopefully the community can see we're taking a holistic look of this even outside of ARP. So that is forthcoming. Lastly, the SERB board did, from a staff perspective, approve our application last week. That was for $50,000 plus a $12,000 match locally, which could come out of our ARP broadband match. That particular grant is being used to support a holistic, full design for infrastructure enhancements, as well as any digital equity eligibility, primarily in South County and West Plains, but could easily extend into other portions of the county as we go further along how much of a holistic solution we want to approach broadband. So that's exciting.
So just clarifying, so you put the application in or it was approved?
It's kind of half of both. So the way this particular board works is you submit it by a deadline. The staff of the SERB, which looks like to be a tethered to Commerce, reviews it for approval. And then you actually go to Lacey in May for their meeting and give your presentation, and then you get the final authorization of funding. So I'm working on that to then present on May 19th in Lacey for the actual awarding.
Okay, so we've been approved far enough along that we're now in.
Yeah, it's
have to go
looking.
present.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. So this is my first interactions with this particular group, so it's kind of interesting to know how they award things. With that, we did initialize our broadband action team with the Washington State Extension, and they are going to be filing that with the Washington State Broadband Office. And that, once again, not only to the SERB board, but also to any upcoming solicitation, bodes very well for Spokane. That broadband action team will be the only broadband action team in Spokane County and will encompass any infrastructure or service enhancements as well as components of digital equity. So that will be a comprehensive solution as we go forward to ensure whether it's rural, urban, combination of both, that is the, I guess you could say, the community touch point group designation in our efforts. So as that's finalized, I will let the City of Spokane Valley know that is in effect, because they may be interested in joining some of those activities. And I am happy to say, with much thanks to Brenda, all 5 of the small cities returned their memorandum of understanding for coordinated efforts going forward for the broadband initiative in South County. That is all I have for the ARP update, unless you have other questions, and then I'll come back around under miscellaneous for a few other things on behalf of Jeff.
You also had the Neco County Achievement Submission.
Oh, yes, thank you. So as I was looking at that, Jared and I were reviewing the submission. I realized that they want concluded projects. And so as of Friday, we realized that this would be a submission that we will probably want to do a little bit further down the road, because although we have a framework set up that's very solid, they really wanted some at the full circle submission. So we really weren't eligible at this point in time. Thank you. Sorry about that, Commissioner.
And it looks like, any questions for Arian on ARP? We're a little ahead of schedule, so I don't know. So we may have you just take the 2 miscellaneous items that you have.
Oh, yes. I'm not sure how I missed that. I missed one particular item that's quite important. We have one other resolution that will be before the board next week, and that will be an amendment to the March 8th resolution that the board allocated funding to the ARP categories. This amendment would be for 2 items. One is to authorize $3 million into the broadband other category. And this would be to allow us to make solicitations, requests for proposals for broadband investments that don't have to do with necessarily broadband functions itself. It could be infrastructure outside of it. It could be for additional confidence studies, things that really don't fit into the other categories that we have had conversations with other firms and those of you individually, that there may be more utility / construction related items that might best fit this, that would leave more capacity in the other areas.
Is that 3I tomorrow?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So it's adding $3 million to that other category.
And adding that category to your expenditure list that you have authorized funding for that. Okay. And some of the reason for that is, as we're looking at upcoming solicitations, the county is limited to 1 application. And so many broadband efforts we can combine into a single ask, but there are a few broadband options that really don't fit and would in some ways be a competition to ourselves. And they're of much smaller amount that maybe we can look at those as local allocation reviews. So that's the primary reason for that. We also will be using some of that funding with our own in-house staff to look at a countywide confidence map, separate from what Commerce has, where individuals can type in their address and get feedback on their download and upload. That's dependent on somebody initiating that. This would be a request from providers not to give us any private information, but to give them a low, medium, high, and then we would color based on some sort of polygon, whether that be parcel, whether that be blocks, confidence maps of low, medium, high throughout the county, so that we could use that as part of our standings going forward as well, because that doesn't exist right now.
So Neco has an app that like tested and that they put out that you actually just click on it and it does the speed for you, and they accumulate all that information. They've been doing that nationally.
Mhm.
All the commissioners know it here. We've had presentations at the board meetings. So you might want to check with Neco
Absolutely.
as to what they already have and how they've already got that. Because I know I've done it different places I've been to show there's no access in Rockford, shall we say. And I'm pretty sure it's tested, but I'd have to go to the apps to find it quickly.
The quandary we ran up in is Medical Lake is who I'm thinking of, where they, on the commerce map, and I will definitely take a look at the NACO map, they showed as high speed, and we don't know if that's because only a few people submitted information that happened to be in a good coverage area, whereas Commissioner Fridge, you can speak more than I do, many residents in the Medical Lake, Silver Lake area are exasperated at their lack of connectivity.
Yeah, and so in the meeting I had last week with Vista, they feel like they've got access to a map that is pretty reliable and updated and stuff. And so they are researching to get us that and stuff. And so in a perfect world, what I was hoping is to gather information from Comcast, because they're gonna right away, some of the other providers, Vista, the city, and ourselves, and put together a comprehensive map for the county that all of us could use and say, okay, we know we're weak in this area, so what do we need to do to be able to strengthen broadband in that area, whether it's in the southeast or the north or the West Plains and stuff. So we'll have one reliable resource that'll actually be in the county that we can all access to and stuff. So hopefully we'll have that in the next 30 days is what I'm hoping.
Okay.
And stuff, so.
Because I know the one with Neco nationally, I mean, the feds have been using that
I'll take a
because there
look at that.
wasn't anything, and so that's why Neco actually put that together.
Right.
But it is, here, I'll show you, it's tested. This is the app.
Wonderful. Okay, I will look that up.
Because then you just click on it and it's how fast is your broadband?
Yes, and that is fantastic. The tricky part is that is an initiation test versus a download. So I'd love to braid that together.
But yes, but that's where if we're out talking to people, we can say, okay, there's this app that you can go to that's going to help us then capture that data to what it truly is right
Exactly.
now, because then it just does it. And
That's fantastic, especially for those areas that.
Well, and the other
Thank you,
thing that
Commissioner.
we've discovered, and I know that it's on the West Plain, I don't know whether you two have discovered it as well, but there are a couple of the third-party providers, and I guess since we're live here, I won't give names, but so it shows that they provide internet in this area, but it's not reliable internet and stuff. And so either the speed is very low, or it's interrupted, or it's supported by microwave, which means that it's, bad weather and you don't have a signal. So that's some of the other stuff we're hoping to capture, so that, it's not just that there's a provider there, how reliable is the provider, how reliable is the network, kind of a deal.
I think all of those are going to be very, very valuable. One other thing on that amendment to the March 8th resolution is a inclusion that the county is going to take indirects in the form of 10% as allowed by the US Treasury going forward upon award. So this will be for everything but revenue replacement and any internal sole sources to the county. So in review with Jeff and the grants office, what is allowed and how many touches. And once again, as we show you that process map, how many internal touches. When we bring a resolution, for example, for the water distribution next week, there will be a line at the bottom that will denote the indirect allocation of 10% based on that award that will be going forward. We will not be claiming any directs. We will be doing the indirect route that will give us the most flexibility for those inputting efforts to the process.
I think that's better way than trying to do direct and tracking and everything that goes with it. And so I think that's what the feds allow. They're allowing it in this grant. I think that's the way to do it, because otherwise it's really hard to capture, you know, Gina's time on the ARP items, you know, everyone else's time. So yes, I think that'll be a way to do that. So, okay. Any other questions or comments for Erin? And then we'll probably, since we have the next group here, we'll probably have you wait on your other two items for miscellaneous.
I'll go join via Zoom and be there for that one at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Move, and then we'll let the Todd Coleman and his group move up.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Chair, for the time and fellow commissioners.
I'll have you
Staff,
introduce the
CEO.
people that are with you.
We can do that. So I'm Todd Coleman, Executive Director of the West Plains PA, also known as S3R3 Solutions. It's been a little while since we've got a chance to meet. Kayla is here from Osborne, as is Josh, and they're going to do most of the presentation this morning. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preamble, and then Karen Corkins, our project manager, who joined us in January, or December, so we're thrilled to have her on board helping us out. So we wanted to take a chance to talk to you about our stormwater study that we did for the West Plains. One of the first things when I got to the West Plains in 2018 that the city and the county had asked us to do was to look at the stormwater issues on the West Plains. We have a lot of bedrock up there, and especially this time of year when you've got frozen ground, you got snow melting, potentially rain on top of that. There's a lot of flooding that occurs. And so a lot of the developments that are happening up there have to take up a lot of land in order to be able to basically create big ponds so that the stormwater can just evaporate, which works great in July and August, but not so good this time of year. So we had Osborne take a look at this for us and do a study. We finished that study last fall. And so now we are moved past the study process, and we're looking at how to implement the stormwater improvements. And so they're going to talk a little bit about that. So the next steps are starting to do the final designs, look at the final geotech, and then start looking at grant dollars, which is really what brings us to here. Is one, our ask at the end of this is not today, but as we go forward, will be to have the county commissioners basically adopt the stormwater plan that we've completed. And then to add, I believe, and Chad can correct me if I'm wrong on what's the right process, but add this into the CIP. Not so that you guys can build it, but just so that you guys basically are recognizing what those stormwater improvements are, so that as we go forward to find grants and to do the implementation stage, that we have checked the boxes and we're in line with our partners as we move forward with that. So I'm sure as they do their presentation, there'll be a few questions come up, so we'll come back to those and answer those. But I'm going to turn it over to Josh and Kayla at this point.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks, Todd. So yeah, we've got some slides up. We'll go through the slides. This is really to give kind of a high level overview of the work that we did in the West Plains stormwater study. So Kayla and I both had a chance to work on this over the last couple of years. We also had a good project team. Osborne Consulting was the prime, so we were managing a group of some other consultants and then working with a number of local stakeholders. So geoengineers, SPVD, landscape architect, FCS group did a lot of the financial side of looking at stormwater fees and things like that, and then TO engineers for transportation. And then there's a lot of land out there, so there's a number of stakeholders. So there's land that's in the city, land that's in the county, the airport's out there. And SDR3 is kind of working to tie that all together and spur development in that area. So let's go to the next slide. So the motivations of the PDA, or the Public Development Authority, also called S3R3. I think kind of like Todd said, really just looking at stormwater at the outset of planning for the West Plains area. a lot of times stormwater comes as a little more of an afterthought, and there's so many gravelly soils and sandy soils that just kind of suck up stormwater runoff in the Spokane area. The West Plains is quite a bit different. There's a lot of shallow basalts. If you know, as you drive out to the airport, you can see the outcroppings right on top of the ground. So you can imagine pouring water on there. It's not going to seep into the ground like it does into the gravelly soils that are in a lot of other areas. So really trying to think of stormwater as one of the first things instead of kind of tacking it on to other engineering design as we go. And then the second question here, is it feasible to construct regional stormwater facilities to ease the burdens on developers? This is really looking at the developable land out there, and like Todd mentioned, if you want to manage your stormwater in the traditional way of managing everything on site, infiltration is not as much of an option. So you're looking at these big evaporation ponds that ends up taking up a large portion of the property that could be developed. So you know, it's really a benefit for developers in the area to be able to pipe their stormwater somewhere else and have it managed at a different location. And then that in turn brings, you know, increased development, more efficiency in the use of the land, better tax revenues, and all of those kinds of things. So that's kind of the quick intro, and I will pass it off to Kayla and let her jump into some of the details.
Yeah, go to the next slide, please. And I think there's a couple clicks on this. You go back, and back one more. Okay, it looks like some of the timing might have gotten mixed up. So there was a map behind the image that's in the foreground to indicate the whole area that the PDA encompasses. And like Josh mentioned, there's city area, and then there's also Spokane County area. And then the airport is kind of central to the PDA, and overall it's about a 15 square mile area that we looked at as part of the stormwater study. During some of the discussions with stakeholder groups, the airport did step out from inclusion in the final comprehensive plan, but that's something that could be revisited in the future. We ended up with 5 basin areas. Yeah, unfortunately, that map isn't showing them, but we're going to highlight a little bit later one specifically that is in the county. The image.
So you've got 2 maps that are layered on top of each other in the same slide. Can you try and pick the Amazon distribution center picture? Will it move right or left?
Yeah.
Or
They're supposed to zoom in.
it's a PDF?
One on the top. Oh, it's a PDF.
Oh,
That's, yeah.
shoot. Yeah, okay. Well, that would be why. But yeah, I'll go ahead.
We can't, it's a PDF.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
not
Never mind. Thank you.
Noted for the future.
You know, technology will.
But yeah, I will pick on Amazon real quick here. I'm sure you all know where that is. We've got I-90 shown on the bottom corner of the slide there. The area highlighted in green is all of their at-grade stormwater infrastructure, so evaporation ponds, and that's roughly 30% of their site that is being used for on-site stormwater management. So you can imagine this is a really similar type of site in terms of the underlying soil conditions with a lot of the area that's out there. And if each site has 30% of its area that it could be using to maximize development and sending that stormwater to a regional facility, that could make a really big difference in terms of attracting developers, but also, like Josh mentioned, the tax revenue that it could generate from that local area. Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. So this is one of those basins that we identified. This is regional area 3. It's located in the south of the West Plains PDA, and the red area is the red line is the PDA boundary. I don't know if we have I-90 highlighted on here, but you can see the airport in the north, the upper right corner there. So on this map, you can see that there is a big purple square. Oops, could you go back, please? So that purple square is the regional facility, the approximate location of where we're going to get that stormwater brought to and then infiltrate it on site and handle that flow volume there. The blue lines on the north part of the red line indicates stormwater conveyance lines. So that's where developers would tap into this regional system and it would send the water and route it to that big purple box. The yellow area that's highlighted on the south side of the red line, that is area that's outside of the PDA. It's within Spokane County, and we did account for it in the sizing of the regional facility in that purple box, but we did not include costs for getting the water to there. So there is some stormwater that naturally runs into the PDA, and we accounted for that volume when we sized the facilities. But it wouldn't be part of the conveyance costs to get the water there, if that makes sense. And this is like what the West Terrace area just to the south, if you can help orient as well. Are there any questions about that?
That box is not to scale.
No, just an easy reference point. Or something to point out from far away.
It's not taking over Project Ray.
Something there. Okay, and then if we could go to the next slide, please. This is an example of a typical roadway section that we're proposing. There's going to be a lot of redevelopment that would occur as part of the growth in the West Plains area. Some of the roads will be new roads, and then some of them will be reconstructed to kind of allow for new capacity and then just redevelop that area. So what we worked with TO engineers, as it says at the bottom of this graphic. And so we've got the roadway footprint, and then on either side, there are landscaped areas, and then also sidewalks or multi-user pathways to really improve non-motorized connectivity throughout the area. We would utilize, from a stormwater perspective, those landscape areas to collect and convey water from developers. They could tap their water into these swale areas. They would provide an at-grade conveyance, and then at specific points throughout each basin, the area that we've got highlighted in red on this this section would have an engineered soil media, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a slide or so, and that would filter and treat pollutants from the stormwater coming off of those developer sites, again, from a regional perspective, before that water would discharge into the conveyance trunk line, which is shown in purple, and that would be subsurface. Next slide, please. Right, so these are two images of BMPs, or best management practices for stormwater, that we selected as part of the stormwater comp plan. On the left side, this is what the treatment areas that I was just mentioning would look like. So the engineered media we selected is called Filterra Bioscape, and it would be planted on top. It would look pretty much like any other planted surface. It just has a high infiltration rate and has been engineered specifically to remove certain stormwater pollutants of concern. And then on the right, we've got the BMP that we selected for managing stormwater volumes from a regional perspective. These are called R tanks, and they're kind of like giant plastic milk crates, and you stack them up on top of each other. You could bury them below ground, and then you can have a structurally stable surface on top, and then really they just provide a volume for you to store that stormwater. So the footprints would be sizable, because we're managing stormwater from very large areas, but then the whole footprint would be in an area where infiltration potential is higher than it likely is on some of the developer sites like the Amazon one I highlighted earlier.
Kayla, is that the purple square?
Yes, thank you for drawing that connection. Yeah, so the box is shown in black on the right, and you can see these construction workers for a size comparison. So the facilities would be about 10 feet tall and buried below ground. And then, yeah, this is what would be where that purple box was shown on the map a couple slides back. Okay, go to the next slide, please. And so the shared space opportunity is really what is so awesome about this stormwater management proposal. It's just really got a cohesive multi-benefit kind of spearheaded approach. In the top left corner, you can see a gray outline, and that's the approximate footprint of the infiltration facility. So what that purple box would look like, and then below it is the black boxes we were just talking about on the previous slide. So this is an example of what a converted parcel could look like and how you could really maximize that community benefit. We've got several soccer fields, baseball diamonds, there's all kinds of paths and things throughout this parcel, and it would just really bring a green open space where that is lacking. Well, there's lots of open space out there now, but when all the development comes in, spaces like this are going to be really needed. So that makes this just super attractive, I think, from a perspective of looking at what future employees and employers are going to want out in that area. And then the fact that it can marry with the stormwater so nicely is really cool. Then could you go to the next slide, please? Back to you.
So in addition to the stormwater concept designs and kind of all the technical stormwater engineering pieces of the study, the cost benefit analysis was the other big piece that we looked at. So FCS was our sub-consultant that did a lot of detailed work on cost benefit analysis. We've got a breakdown here. So some of the benefits are tax revenue that would go to asset value. So, just improved value of the land as it's developed and can be developed more efficiently. And then property cost avoidance is just kind of the benefit that we've been talking about for developers of being able to use the full parcel of the land and then take the stormwater and bring it to somewhere else. Costs, a number of costs, the construction costs and design costs. Operations and maintenance, I think, is a big consideration. So this would be one up for further discussion for who's going to lead that. One of the big pieces of the study was looking at a stormwater utility. So developing a utility that would collect fees from developers or from property owners. And then that would go in to fund the maintenance program. But one of the local agencies would likely need to lead that program, the utility. So that's something that's still in discussion, I think. But O&M is obviously a long-term cost. Financing interest contingencies. And then when you look at adding all of these up, we've got a total cost estimate of $156 million for the stormwater piece. So FCS took that then and ran kind of a number of different scenarios and came up with several cost benefit ratios. So the one here is the one that we landed on, of a cost benefit ratio of roughly 3-to-1. So the study is showing really a lot of financial benefit in going with a regional system versus going with kind of the traditional separated approach where everyone manages their own stormwater on their own sites. Let's go to the next slide. So this one's a little bit small, but this is the recommended breakdown from our study of how the cost could be divided. So the cost is not all going to one agency or jurisdiction. It's more divided by who is receiving the benefits. Some of those agencies will put in some money. The PDA will put in some money will come from grants. Some money will come from the developers as they construct and pay their development fees. So this is the initial breakdown, and this would be adjusted as decisions are made and as things go forward. Next slide. So some next steps we've got on the top. These are some next steps in just kind of executing the engineering side of things. And then we've got some next steps in funding on the second line. So first is adopting the stormwater plan. So as Todd mentioned, this is something that we would hope the county would adopt the stormwater plan, and just basically recognize it as the planning mechanism for moving forward. So not necessarily committing to do everything that's in it, but saying, we accept this plan and we'll continue to discuss what the next steps are. There is currently a transportation plan that's being done with S3R3 and a group of consultants. So that's looking at really transportation needs in the area, as development occurs, how many trips are going to be, what's the increase in daily trips going to be, and how do we plan for that with new roadways or expanding existing roads. So we would want to align any stormwater work with future road work, just so that things can be done efficiently and done at the same time. There's a little bit of work that needs to be done on comprehensive planning for utilities. So some of the utilities are city utilities in the West Plains. So, the city may take the lead on something like water and sewer, especially in areas more to the east. But there's some work that needs to be done to just kind of tie that all together. Regional system ownership. So who owns the system, who owns the stormwater utility and manages it. I think that's one of the big questions. That definitely needs some discussion still. And then agencies would adopt capital improvement plans. So this would be something that the county can work into their plan for pieces that fit into it. On the funding side of things, a rate structure for developers. So this would be initial fees as they develop a parcel they would pay in, and that would cover some of the overhead cost or the overall cost of getting some of these large facilities built, and then ongoing costs that would cover some of the operations and maintenance, and just build that fund for to build the next steps and maintain them. Low impact design rate credit programs. We looked some at, if property owners can decrease the amount of stormwater coming off of their properties, maybe they would receive some type of credit. State and federal grants is obviously going to be a big piece of this. I think, as much grant funding as we can go for, I think is what S3R3 wants to do, and use that as a funding mechanism. And then local agency funding. So there's going to be partnership with the city and the county for funding too. So those are kind of some of the next steps. We can go to the next slide, and this one just kind of illustrates tying some of these things together. Yeah, this is the map that didn't show up earlier. So you can see the 5 different colored areas are the 5 conveyance areas. So each one of those areas would have one of these regional facilities, and then a system of pipes that collected stormwater and brought it to a central location where it would infiltrate. So the one we're looking at here again is kind of on the south side by the Medical Lake Interchange or the West Terrace area. And in this case too, we would want to look at coordinating with any roadway improvements. So we know that Hayford Road may be realigned, and there's other projects that may happen at some point in the future. So how can we strategically think through this and align the stormwater improvements with some of these other roadway projects? Next slide. So that's what we got, I guess.
So I'd like to add just 2 more real quick things, if you wouldn't mind. So one is I want to thank Chad and Matt for being involved in the study. So it was really helpful. One of the things we talked about and how we implement this was how could we not duplicate, we S3R3, some of the services that you all have available already. And just to throw it out on the table, one of the things that we wanted to talk about at a later date is, at least that concept was, the city of Spokane, for instance, has maintenance crews that could go out and maintain these facilities. So maybe we revenue share in such a way that we don't have to create our own maintenance crews and equipment and all that kind of stuff. We could actually partner with them to provide that service. And maybe with the county, since you guys can already bill stormwater, we don't set up a billing department in order to bill the stormwater fees. Can we partner with the county and use those resources that you already have available to do some of that? So some of those things are some of the things that we wanted to explore at a later date. And I really appreciated just those conversations about how can we partner to make this make sense. The other one that's the elephant in the room, it's $156 million. It's a big one, right? I mean, it's a lot of money. And, we've really, struggled with that too. And really the idea is we just got to get moving. We just got to start, and we just got to keep pushing forward on it. And I think that one chart that was in there that showed how sort of the benefits sort of related to how we expected or would anticipate those costs would get shared is really an important slide to be thinking about. So you know, I don't know if the county has $12 million to help support a stormwater facility in the West Plains, but at least it's not a $156 million ask. So we tried to look at it and who's receiving the benefit? How could we split all these elements up to try to work back to how do we get that full benefit back out of it? So, but would love to answer any of your questions that you have.
So you talked about the collection of the stormwater and stuff, but you didn't talk about the paleo channels and how you're going to discharge any of that water. Do you want to touch on that, or is that a secret?
No.
Okay.
Proprietary.
Well, it's critical because, you know, you're going to collect all this stuff in a basin.
Yes.
What are you going to do with it? You're going to sit there and wait for the sun to shine?
Right.
That's not, I mean, that's not a good solution.
Yeah, I don't know if you can go back to that map
Yeah,
that's on
Yeah.
there.
and I apologize. That was on the slide with the map that was covered and that I'm getting over a cold and I'm a little bit foggy, so I apologize. I
Can you
didn't
pull the thing back up?
cover that.
Mike, can you pull the map back up, please?
So I can touch on that if you'd like, or do you? want
Go to
know?
the last, yeah, that one,
Yeah.
that one there's the one you
Shown on
want,
that
right?
one. I don't know if they're outlined on that.
I didn't see them on there and stuff, and so that's why I was curious.
I think it was that that other map that got laid over the other
Okay.
ones where it was being shown. But what the idea is, we are fortunate that there's these deep channel paleo channels that are out there. They're from the Missoula flood. So when the floods receded, they basically left these deep granular rock formations that are about 20 to 100 feet below the surface. And the idea behind those R tanks was you excavate those out, that area out down to that paleo channel. You put that black cellular structure on top of it, get the stormwater in there, and then that stormwater will go into those paleo channels. And it basically goes back and recharges the Spokane River. One of the initial studies we need to do, though, is make sure that that water doesn't pop out somewhere else, like Indian Canyon or somewhere else, right, and cause any downstream effects. So one of the things we're trying to do first is to make sure we get our geotechs in there to really evaluate those structures to make sure there's no impacts to any of the downstream folks. If it's recharging the Spokane River, that's a good thing. So, and it also provides us that opportunity for those public open spaces, because we really have a lot of people in the West Plains who might commute in and commute out. And so we really like to have places where people want to live there, eat there, work there, play there, and maybe we can reduce some of that commuter traffic.
So it's similar to what the city did with their stormwater storage facilities. They buried these massive storage tanks under the ground and then built parks and things over the top of them and stuff. So you got public use out of it. But really, I mean, Joe Sixpack on the street would never even know that there was a big stormwater storage facility underneath the park and stuff. So same concept that the city has done and done very successfully. And then can you go to the second slide? Just back it up to the one that showed Amazon. That one there. So this is what's happened all over the West Plains, is that developers are having to acquire anywhere from 12 on a good day to 30% more land to provide stormwater holding facilities like the Greenbelt up here and stuff. And so if a developer would able to reduce the amount of land they need to support the building and parking, and then pipe into a system that was available to them, then they would pay a premium for that service because they don't have the ongoing maintenance as well. And you look at Caterpillar and the big duck pond behind that, or Amazon, or any of these, you know, someone could make the argument that if we are trying to apply growth management to this, we would reduce the amount of land dedicated to stormwater storage facilities like this on the surface, and be able to use that land for more productive uses. Like, well, I mean, that both those areas to the north there of Amazon could be commercialized and developed if they weren't dedicated to holding water and stuff. So that's, I think the developers would pay to be able to hook up to this to avoid having to acquire more land.
I think another key piece is that a property like Amazon could also decide to come back and connect into the system and then develop the rest of their property. So if they wanted to expand or parcel a little bit of that off and allow another development, that would be possible too.
Question. A couple questions, actually. Those black R box, I think you called them, presumably those are not structurally where you can build on top of them, right? That's why you have kind of a passive recreation area. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can put like parking, like vehicles can drive on top of it and stuff like that, but
They don't structurally support buildings, things like that.
yeah, correct. Well, and you'd want to make sure too, there needs to be a place where you can access them for maintenance. So that was something that we considered heavily with all of the options that we looked at for the stormwater comp plan is like, number one, is it maintainable? And number two, like, what is that cost going to look like? Because that is part of what we need to be considering is not just construction costs, but life cycle maintenance costs. So if you were to put something on top of it and, something happened, that could be a huge safety and liability concern.
It was
So yeah,
also,
definitely more passive.
it was also such that if there was like 100-year event, that like we showed the play fields above it, those might pond up in a 100-year event and then they would rapidly drain back down. So part of that was some
Be a depressed,
depressed
area.
extra storage just in case.
So if I recall on the map, it shows about 5 different identified stormwater areas, correct? And so is it fair to say that each of these 5 would have what we're terming a regional stormwater facility in them? And each of those then would have kind of a rendering or a use similar to what you laid out for a recreational area in and around
Yep.
there?
Yeah, and we looked, sorry, go ahead.
The only exception is that you got the blue map up. There is no paleo channel kind of right along I-90 down there. So that was the only one that was separate. We looked at a detention pond that would be kind of to the south of Spokane produce area. They would eventually drain into the wetlands because there is no place to drain that one to a paleo channel. That was the only exception.
And I think even on that one too, we did work with SPVB to look at like, well, what if we did a trail kind of system through like that pond or something like that, something to make it like a destination or an enhanced open space so that the public could still be utilizing it. But we also looked at things like dog parks and like we could like surveys could be conducted to find out what that need would be for the recreation. There's like endless opportunities for what that surface could be.
So did you, in your research, ever connect with Todd Whipple and the work that he's done for drainage out south of I-90?
I've met with him, yeah.
Okay, he believes that there's a drainage facility there northwest of Caterpillar that is a natural draining area. He suspects that it might be going under the freeway and then tying into the paleo channel and stuff. So, but if you've met with him, you had that
Yeah, I've talked to him
conversation.
about some of that, and I know geoengineers are really the experts in all of that stuff, but it sounds from what they've said, they call them fingers of the paleo channel. So
Right.
you've got kind of your broad basin and then it kind of creeps out a little bit farther. So there are some of those spots where, you'll find one parcel where water just kind of disappears into the ground and then the next one over has a bunch of basalt or a little basalt basin and
Right.
catches everything.
You just gotta make sure you catch the finger then drain into.
Which is what Amazon did in theirs. I guess they
Yeah.
found like a 2-foot thick lens and were able to get into that.
Yeah.
Fortunately, so.
So 156 million, it's really talking 5 facilities for that. So that's a big number, but when you break it down into a number of facilities, it's not for one, it's for multiple.
And it's for the facilities and also the routing of the
Conveyance.
water to get there within the PDA boundaries. And the idea too was that the conveyance lines are gonna be put in as roadway improvement projects, like Josh mentioned, the transportation plan is being put together. So the idea being to marry those to maximize cost benefit savings. And I think, there's opportunity for more of those to be realized when things get a little bit further beyond where we stopped.
The ask today, though, is just to include it as part of the capital facilities plan so that you can start going out and finding grant money and stuff. So other than that, there's no financial ask as of today. Matt, Chad, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I've looked through the plan and participated in the development of it, and it's a great idea. I mean, I applaud everybody that's been involved in trying to shine the crystal ball and anticipate where development's gonna come and get ahead of it. Because on the West Plains, when you compartmentalize it into parcels, it eats so much developable land. It's really a huge impact. So conveying it, utilizing the soils where these fingers do occur, offering credits potentially when that happens. But yeah, it's a great idea, you know, and it will take some storm drainage on all these parcels. You know, nobody gets a free pass. There'll be a treatment requirement, but more in keeping with what we do everywhere else in the county. The 208 ponds, people are so used to seeing, you know, they treat it, they get the sediment out, so they preserve our conveyance systems that we're going to spend a fortune on eventually. And they also it attenuates it too. It slows down the flows and allows us to reduce the size of the conveyance. So a lot of benefits to keeping a small amount of stormwater on site, but it's going to greatly increase the amount that they can use to develop. And there's things too, like, you know, we know that they take up a big footprint, but when they hold water, that's a whole different nuisance issue. We've had these in neighborhoods where we have lined evap ponds, and it turns into like putting a sewage lagoon in the middle of a neighborhood. I mean, it's nowhere we want to go. Then you compile that with bird strike and other potential issues. And I'm just really pleased that the West Plains PDA and Commissioner French and everybody has been on board with trying to get ahead of this issue. Because if we plan and we start making smart investments now, I mean, maybe we don't get the whole 150 million in one shot, but if you're strategic about how you piece together the conveyance and fill in the gaps on the existing conveyance system and start, you know, pick which one you think is most likely to happen first and do the infiltration facility. Yeah, it's a real opportunity. I mean, it's going to benefit everybody. And then if we can combine that with passive recreation or whatever the community decides it wants out there, it's nothing but a win. So it's really good.
And we already assessed a stormwater fee out there already now.
Yeah.
That, you know, many would argue that I'm paying the fee, what am I getting? And we've heard that, but this would be one of those things you could be getting is, you know, getting rid of the water on a permanent basis.
Right.
Okay. And so then with the neighborhoods to the south that we know we have issues with, how would that potentially feed into this?
Yeah, it's kind of what Josh had alluded to. They studied the portion south of I-90 that drains to it, and the West Terrace ARP money that was allocated by the board is going to fill in that conveyance gap. It's going to clean up getting the water up to the northern area of the basin and just basically formalize that conveyance and fix all the drainage issues we're having and allow room for future development in the West Terrace area. So it's got a lot of benefits to it. It's going to be not just the one neighborhood, but development in general, and West Terrace would benefit from that RFP or the ARP money that we're going out for.
Any other?
Thank you very much for your time. Very much appreciated.
And so is this going to be set for a consent agenda just to move it into we're just discussing today and then we'll bring it back to.
I'm going to anticipate, and Chad, you correct me if I'm wrong, or Matt, that this plan and when those dollars might be needed, because it's a multi-year plan, would be incorporated into our 6-year CIP update for this year for the board's later consideration.
Right. And so our schedule would be later this year and towards the September timeframe, trying to get in front of our budget process. And so we would include whatever projects the board wants to put in. But I would assume that we would come back as the projects get developed, put money to them and define them. We'll add those to the plans, come back to you guys and say, hey, do you want to include these? That would give us a formula. Say, yeah, so.
Our annual 6-year CIP update, which will happen later in the year.
But we don't have to wait until the annual update. We can,
Absolutely.
if we just decide we're going to hold a hearing, we can amend the CIP anytime we want and stuff. So we could at some point just hold a hearing on it, just like we do any other item, and then add it to the capital improvement program. And you could argue that the ARP money that we've already allocated for this is part of that funding to justify adding it to the plan and stuff. And so,
especially if it helps timing wise to accelerate looking for other
Other
dollars to be
grants.
able to come in. Yep.
yeah, well, and that's my concern is with the amount of infrastructure money that's still out there with the amount, there's a whole bunch of money that's still unallocated, hadn't even worked its way down through the state. We don't know what we could be eligible for, but whatever we can grab, we should grab it. And the only thing standing on our way of grabbing it's a CIP. So.
Along those lines, if the board wants this, as soon as we get the projects, we can bring that forward as a preview as far as where the projects are. And then bring a public hearing forward with the addition of CIP. This is presuming transportation projects coinciding. And it all fits in. Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess, I don't have a problem bringing it in as long as we know what the funding requirements are going to be. If we bring it actually formally into the CIP, then are we committing to the funding?
But you could bring it in, you can, and correct me if I'm wrong on this. You can bring the whole project, you can identify the whole project, but you can just deal with it phase by phase. So, maybe the only phase we deal with, quite frankly, in the first part of it is, that part around the Medical Lake interchange. Like Scott said, there's actually 5 phases into this thing, but we don't have to bite the apple on all of them all at once. So maybe we just identify one of them and then start to put together the funding to make it happen.
Right, well, and I'm just trying, if it's coming into our complete CIP process for, our 6-year plan, we've got other things going on around the county too, that, I think that's what I'm, at this point in time, I don't know how this affects all of that. So that's part of what I would want to make sure we're looking at and paying attention to.
So I'm presuming that you guys are thinking that we bring it into the plan unfunded. with
Unfunded,
potential
yeah.
future funding.
Yeah, that way it's not taken away from other projects.
And it wouldn't affect anything else.
Kind of our best practices is when you bring something in, your out years might be unfunded, but the current year that you're looking at for that 6th year or your if it's 2023 through 2027 or 8, your 2023 is where you have your funding identified. Things that are still unfunded are kind of in your out years, but it's not uncommon to have things in your CIP that you don't have funding sources identified yet. But your intent, because it enables you to go after grants, because some of these grants will say, is it identified in your 6-year CIP? Yep, it's right there. We don't have funding for it yet. That's why we're pursuing it.
Well, and just some of the grants may require matching and different costs. So that's where it's like, I want to make sure we're looking holistically to what's already there, what we're already planning, and because this is a big chunk of change, as we move forward, but and benefits for it too. So, but I just want to make sure I have a chance to look at the whole picture,
Well, and there are many partners to this too. So it's not just us, City of Spokane, S3R3, private developers, the airport, they're the city. So there's a whole lot of partners and money that might be eligible for the city, but not for the county. And I'm assuming you're going to make the same request to the city about being part of the CIP too.
Yeah, they already made a presentation to them and are moving that forward as well. What we don't want to get ourselves in is like last October, there was some DOE grant dollars that were available in October I can't remember, it was like $2 or $3 million, but it would have helped us get some of that geotech work done, for instance. But because we hadn't gone through the CIP process, we couldn't
even
do
apply.
it. Yeah, because we hadn't coordinated that with the jurisdiction. So we don't want to find ourselves in that same position this fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
No, you guys, I think it's great. And I think getting into forethought is awesome. So. So Chad and Matt, you guys get to stay. Thank you all. Welcome to the big table.
Yeah, back in person. How about that?
Okay, so you guys, Todd, Coles and Matt Zerk are next for a public works update.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick briefing this morning on a few different items, some traffic code revisions in the form of bridge load limits. You can see on this slide, we're removing the old limits from the Chatteroy Bridge, putting on new ones, and then also Connor Bridge. So we'll step through these pretty quickly. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the first one. This is Chatteroy Road. You can see it's directly adjacent, just west of Highway 2 in the north part of the county. This bridge has been struggling for a while. We had load limits on it. The state changed the way we look at bridges in terms of the software that structurally evaluates them. And essentially it's cutting the potential loads in half, which it was bad already and now it's getting worse. So it's one we're going to apply for funding for on this cycle. We're hopeful to get that, and then we realistically build it 23, 24, 25, somewhere in that neighborhood. Next slide. And this is just zoomed in closer. It's an older bridge. If you've ever been through Chatteroy, there's a little community there in Chatteroy, and this is the main bridge right when you come off the highway. Next slide. Okay, this is the next bridge. You can see it's kind of in the southeast part of the county. Connor Road, this is just outside of Valley Ford. Valley Ford's a little further to the east. Next slide. And this is just zoomed in a little more. Connor is not a major road for us. It's a low volume road. We're gonna do this work with our maintenance crews. It is not eligible. It's a short span bridge. It's not eligible for federal funding. We have a lot of those. And our crews have been getting really good at doing 1 or 2 of these a year, which is huge. I mean, we pay a fraction of the cost, you know, a couple $100,000 compared to $1 million type of thing. It's really been a great program. Our bridge crew does a really good job. It's basically, we put in these steel bridges that are prefabbed and brought in, they bolt together, and then we put a gravel and a surface if appropriate on them. And they're going to be a really good product for us. We do the foundation work, or we sub it depending on the complexity of it, and then put the structure on top. So it's a really good program, and we'll keep it moving forward because we have that hole in our funding where short spans aren't eligible for federal.
So you moved away from the span deck product you guys were doing, like down at the plaza, the bridge?
I think so. These are, the one we did most recently was down on State Line Road, over, you know, the very far southeast end of the county. And then we've done a couple this year, Wallace, and one other one. I don't remember the name of it, but it's been a really good program. You know, it fills a gap for us. It allows us to get these bridges back online. Some of them were virtually failed. So they were old timber bridges, and you're faced with either redeck with wood and try and make the foundations work, or we go to this, and it's a much more permanent solution, saves our folks a lot of time in the long run, their life cycle on it. Yeah, really good program. Next slide. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about today is Hastings Road next to Fred Meyer up in the Wandamere area. We have a safety project we're looking at doing, and it doesn't take board action, but I definitely want you all to be aware of it, just in case you get any phone calls regarding it. Next slide. Next slide. And if you're familiar with it, Hastings and 395 Division Street up north, there's a Fred Meyer kind of at the bottom of the long hill. And one of the approaches in particular is the one we're looking at. And it shows on the next slide, please. It's the first one, the westernmost approach to Fred Meyer's off of Hastings. And it's a pretty major approach. A lot of the existing parking lot is channeled there. And we have quite the accident history with it. Next slide. This is kind of a diagram of the accidents that are occurring. And we had 29 reported in the last 5 years. And those are just the ones that got reported. I would suspect there's several times that many that don't get reported that are, you know, probably property damage type accidents, but nobody was hurt. And the biggest one we have trouble with is when people are pulling out of Fred Meyer's to take a left, they're looking and the the inside lane of the eastbound traffic is slowing down to turn, and they don't see a car behind it in the through lane, the lane just north of it. So the other eastbound lane. So that's where we're getting a lot of accidents, and those are bad because you're hitting somebody right in the driver's side of the car, and the potential for injuries is pretty significant. So want to do something about this. This is one of our highest collision intersections in the county. Cascade and Wall being another one that we're looking at too with the safety program, but this is a big one for us. So on the next slide, we'll show you what we're talking about doing. These are temporary raised channelization with those bollards on it. They're durable, they're made for this type of area, and they're made to take the abuse. And you know, if the bollards get knocked off, they can be replaced, and it's real industrial. And what this allows us to do is to go in there and try out the channelization and see if running some channelization across that approach so people can't turn left anymore. It forces people to be right in and right out from that intersection, which is a little bit of a challenge because a lot of people use that. It means they have to go to one of the other approaches, but it'll get us more separation from that turning traffic so people have better visibility. And the hope is that will decrease, if not eliminate, the accidents we're having at that intersection. We have talked to Vanderbilt on the north and Fred Meyer's, they're Kroger, they're a subsidiary of Kroger, and they understand, they see the accidents too. Nobody wants to reduce access to their site, but they both were accepting it. They understand there's accidents, they want their customers safe too, so they were okay with the project proceeding. So we've talked to them about it. We will brief them again before we put it in, just to give them a heads up of when exactly. We'll give them, 2 to 5 days notice, just so they know what's going to happen. There may be some signage that they need to do on their site. We've talked to them about that, and they seem on board with doing that, just letting people know it's right in and right out. So when they come out to the intersection, they know they have to turn right. So that's what we're
And
proposing.
you're not gonna allow people then to turn into the Fred Meyer from.
Correct. Yeah, it's only right in, right out. So if you're westbound on Hastings heading towards Division, you can't take that left. You would have to turn at the previous driveway approach.
You have 2 other driveways
that you
right
can-
within
Yeah.
200 feet that you can take and get
Okay.
into that parking lot.
Yeah, it is a little more circuitous. We kind of run people around their parking lot, but it's that or we have these accidents, and we don't want to wait for something really bad to happen.
So where do you think they're gonna do the U-turn transition?
Yeah. Everywhere, basically.
Everywhere, yeah.
Spokane drivers are creative that
Yeah,
way, so
yeah.
they'll get to where they want to go. So anyway, the plan is that we'll do this, we'll get it installed. Our guys are ready to go. They've pre-ordered the product last fall, and they would like to do it soon. They're trying to get on to all their striping activities they have for the year. They want to get this out of the way ahead of it, so we're ready to go on it. Next slide. And the purple is where we're talking about adding this temporary channelization. The blue is existing raised channelization for the intersection. And we're just going to extend it out and see how it operates. It's 120 feet. Next slide. And you can see the 2 other approaches there,
Right.
further to the east. Yeah, thank you. Next slide. So as we talked, the plan is late April, we'll install this product called Quick Curb. And then in late August, we'll take a look at it and see how it's operating and see if that's helped with our collisions. And determine if we want a permanent installation. This is not a forever answer. We want to see how it works for a while and see if it's doing what we expected it to do. If it is, then we could issue a small works contract in late October and get a concrete contractor on board to make it permanent. We'll just dial it into the existing roadway. And next slide. That's it. Does anybody have any more questions regarding that? All right, that's all I had.
Okay, very good. Okay, so do we have a pending potential litigation?
Yeah, can we stick around for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's gonna be my problem pretty soon.
Fine.
Yeah.
So.
I'm thinking 15 minutes at the most.
Okay.
Depending on what you guys like, how that
And
goes.
will we come out and take action?
No.
And do you want to do that now, or do we want to? Okay. guess we can just do it now versus and come back because we've got a couple others later in the morning.
And if we could promote, Commissioner, if we could promote Dale Anderson and Mike, where am I blanking his last name all of a sudden?
Is it Nelson?
Nelson, Mike Nelson, sorry, don't know why it's based on that. We can promote those two, I appreciate it.
Okay, so we're going to go into executive session for 15 minutes for pending and potential litigation, RCW 4230.1101I. Those will be our, all those people that will be attending will be the 3 commissioners, our executive management team, Chad Coles, Matt Zarecor, and then from our attorney's side, it'll be Mark McLean, Dale Anderson, and Mike Nelson. Is that everyone that is going to be in attendance? Okay.
Yes, Commissioner.
So it is 10:56. It'll probably take us just a couple minutes to get into executive session. So I'm going to say it's going to start at 10:58 and it'll be for 15 minutes and we'll be back to continue our meeting. Okay, it is 11:15. We did end our executive session at 11:13 and it took us just a few minutes to make the switch back. No action was taken. And we are now starting with our miscellaneous items. So Erin Schmidt joining us. Yeah. Is she here?
Small conference, right?
She did say she was going to join from upstairs.
I never made it upstairs.
There you go.
All right, commissioners, there are 2 items that Jeff McMorris wanted me to share with you on behalf. One is an update on the Homeward Bound initiative with Volunteers of America. That is currently in process with the grants office. And I spoke with Fawn last week and they're just finishing that through their processes. And it is expected that that will be on your consent agenda on the 26th. Then lastly, we received a request for a letter of support from Inland Power and Light Company, who are submitting a bid with the Department of Energy, who has a Investment and Infrastructure Jobs or IIJA Act solicitation opportunity. And so we've constructed a letter for your review, and the main purpose of their ask will be for power grid reliability and resistance with a primary focus in wildland fire mitigation, primarily in the urban area wildlife interface. So that has been prepared. And if the board so chooses, wanted to see if you could do a motion to sign outside a consent session, or if you would like it on the consent agenda next week.
Madam Chair, I move to approve and authorize the drafting and signing of a letter in support of Inland Power and Light's grant application for the 2021-22 Federal Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, as described by Erin Schmidt, be signed by the majority of the board outside of an open public meeting. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Right out there.
You're busy.
I was busy.
You're busy.
Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion passes unanimously. Very good. Okay. So yes, everyone can have a chance to take a look at that and then maybe later get it signed. That, they need that pretty quickly, right?
That would be appreciated, yes.
Okay. And then Scott, are you next on the list?
Yeah, and Jared's got something too, I believe, as well. Mine are pretty quick. 2 cleanup items. When Shrek was established back in 1819, the county and Shrek created a interlocal service agreement, administrative service agreement, where as Shrek was kind of standing up their operations, county was providing some support for administrative services until they got kind of fully staffed and whatnot. since about 2020, we have no longer been providing those services. This agreement is just, it's been outstanding. It was able to be terminated by mutual agreement. Came upon it a couple weeks ago. I've talked to Shrek. They confirmed that they didn't need it. Counties confirmed that we're not providing anything under it. So this would be on your consent agenda. Mark's team has worked up a resolution for the board for next week, and then a termination letter, which will be sent once you approve the resolution. Questions on that? Second one, somewhat related, is pre-Shrek. The county commissioners had by code established an emergency communications policy board, which basically acted as oversight for the 911 emergency communications system that was provided countywide. That policy board essentially ceased to exist once Shrek was stood up. However, the language still sits in the code today, which acknowledges the board. That board is no longer needed. They have not been functioning. They've not been in place. So again, another code cleanup thing would be repealing that county code. It's SCC 1.08B regarding the Emergency Communications Policy Board. That again would be on your consent agenda for next week. It's just cleaning up because we now have Shrek, which is our regional emergency communications entity. They have a board which has been established by the county commissioners, which includes public safety across the community, plus across the Spokane County, plus a community member and myself as well on that board. So again, just code cleanup. Okay, that was all I had. I think Jared had something on a grant for the medical examiner's office.
Jared.
Yes, it's a funding request from our medical examiner's office for some federal funding for the community funded project application. It's seeking $500,000 in funding in a direct request to Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers. The purpose of this funding would go towards the purchase of forensic genetic genealogy testing software and data that will help fuel that software. The main purpose of getting that software and data is to identify human remains that have been unidentified thus far, and also cold cases to help speed along cold cases. And so this was a request that came through very quickly late last week from Dr. Singh, and we slapped together a draft letter from the three commissioners in support of the request for your consideration. And I sent that along to Gina last week, so hoping that you have a copy of that in front of you.
Got it right here.
So the funding is through which federal source?
So I believe this is part of the earmarks that the Congresswoman is in charge of, the community project funding. I'm not sure if these are the same buckets that Jeff has projects for each one of the three of you in, but maybe Arian, do you know what bucket of money these community project funding requests are coming from?
I believe this is in addition to the three priorities that were sent to Senator Cantwell Murray and Congresswoman McMorris Rogers. So I believe this is a part of the settling of the federal budget that occurred earlier. This is also in addition to the commerce funds that the medical examiner has under consideration. So it was just a new one. Is it the omnibus? Did I say that right?
Yes. Okay. Because this says in community project funding. So I mean, I guess that's why I'm just.
I believe it's a part of the federal budget finalization where it's earmarked, but still a competitive grant. But if we put a submission for, we have a high likelihood of receiving it.
Any other comments?
So, Madam Chair, I would move that we authorize the drafting and signing of a letter to be signed and noted in an open public meeting by the Board of County Commissioners to Congresswoman Kathleen Morse Rogers and support for the Spokane County Medical Examiner's Office Community Funded Project application and the amount of $500,000 for a forensic, genetic, genealogy, DNA testing project.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Commissioner Clancy, do you mind signing the colored copy?
He is.
Sorry.
Okay, are there any other miscellaneous items to come before the commissioners today? Okay, not seeing any. Then we have,
Oh, actually, I do. I was just, so tomorrow on our consent agenda, we are adopting the precinct boundaries. And so I had a Zoom call last week with the auditor staff from the elections office, and there was one of the recommendations they took from public testimony that they implemented into the changes, in the precincts. It was the one precinct 9005 that kind of had the tail that reached up kind of in the ninth legislature. They made that tail its own precinct because it had like 250 people in it. So they felt comfortable making that its own standalone precinct rather than having the one sort of separated cluster of residents from the majority of the precinct down below. So.
very good.
Yep.
Okay, and that's already set. The new maps are set for tomorrow.
Yeah, and I looked online and they updated those online last week on Friday. That's what's
So reflects on that.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So then we have it looks like two executive session items. So Ashley, it looks like you're gonna have one on the performance of public employee. How long? Shows 10 minutes. Sorry.
Yes, 10 minutes.
10 minutes. And I'm assuming the commissioners, our executive management team, and Mark McLean, our attorney.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second one, I don't know who is requesting this.
I believe that's for bond counsel, is it not? A discussion of bond counsel?
Okay.
Yep.
So however long you'd like, commissioners, and
Okay. Alan?
5 minutes, what you think?
Can't be that long.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Take care.
I do too.
So we anticipate 5 minutes. So we'll be going into executives, and for that one, it'll be the 3 commissioners, our executive management team, and Mark McLean, our attorney. So with that, we will go in for 15 minutes total. We will adjourn for the day, and we'll be reconvening tomorrow for our 2 o'clock consent agenda. It is 11:27. Thank you all very much.
we don't anticipate any action, is that right, coming out?
Correct.
I didn't hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. I did not ask that. Okay, thank you. And so since we don't anticipate any action going out, then we will just adjourn for the day. Thank you.